What you got? Okay. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start. If they come, that'll be great. If they don't, we'll just move forward. I'd like to start off by asking Judge if he'd ask a blessing.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. Thank you for the many blessings you've given us. Thank you for this opportunity to serve the citizens of the state of Georgia. Pray that you give us wisdom in doing that, and pray that you watch over the things that happen in our state and give us a good, clear road to go on. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you. I had it yesterday, and I asked some people. We're trying to get some facts and figures on number of personnel people different organizations have, what their allocation is, how many they have in place, and a variety of other issues. It's only 5 questions, but they were emailed out today to every organization, and we'd like to get those back if we could. They're doing it to every state organization is going to get a copy of that, and we're just trying to get a handle on what we have and what we don't have, and what our really serious deficits are in some areas. We have some people that aren't funded adequately, and I don't know how they conduct their business, and so if you'd help us with that, I'd appreciate it. First up today is the Georgia Supreme Court. And as we go down all these universal subjects, the $2,000 pay raise and the health and merit system thing, the things that everybody's going to get, you don't have to address unless you have a problem. I mean, some organizations didn't get that money last year and had to pay salaries out of their own funds, and then we reimbursed them in the amended budget. But there's no sense going over those. But if you could just follow the tracking sheets, and I'd appreciate it.
Of course. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Nels Peterson. I'm on the Supreme Court. I am not Michael Boggs. I do not have the hair to pull that off. But delighted to be with you. The first 4 points on the tracking sheet, this is section 10.1. The first 4, 10.1, .1, .2, .3, and .4 are all just the mandatory pass-throughs that we have generally every year. I'm happy to go into detail about any of those that you have questions about, but otherwise. The next 2, .5 and .6, are for central staff positions. The floating position we had as a request in the FY23, and we're not able to get that funded, and so we're back with that again, and then we have an additional central staff position. Our central staff is for a appellate court of our size and nature, very small, relatively speaking. We have 7 central staff attorneys, and then 2 others who do exclusively death penalty work, and so they don't really count as a central staff and intake attorney. They do jurisdictional screening on everything that gets filed in the court. They write up substantive memos on cert petitions. They write up recommendations on habeas petitions. Those documents can be dozens of single-spaced pages long and do lots of in-depth analysis. They write up recommendations and draft opinions in bar discipline and judicial discipline cases. So they are sort of the first line of defense on everything that hits our court. And we have a lot of stuff that hits our court. Central staff has always been sort of understaffed. And when we have a vacancy in a chambers attorney, we wind up pulling someone from central staff to fill that vacancy on a temporary basis. And so these two requests really are to try to cover those deficiencies. I'm happy to go into more detail on those if you would like.
I was just wondering how many attorneys you have that aren't justices?
So we have 7 central staff lawyers. We have 2 death penalty clerks. And then
Are they attorneys?
They are attorneys as well, and they do exclusively death penalty work. We then, in chambers, we have 2 permanent staff attorneys per judge, and then we have a term clerk, which is cyclical. It rotates. It's basically a new lawyer that we hire at a reduced salary, kind of like the federal system does, and they serve only for 1 year before we move on. So each chambers has 3 lawyers, 2 of whom are seasoned and permanent, and 1 of whom rotates through each year. So total of 27 lawyers in chambers and another 9, so that's 36 as a court. Not counting lawyers like our clerk and our deputy clerk. Happy to provide any additional
No,
information.
I
on
was
those.
just curious.
Okay. And then the next point, 10.1.7, this was a request for a 3% salary adjustment for those permanent staff attorneys that we have in chambers. There's only 18 of them. And provided that the 2% or the $2,000 raise is funded, we're not trying to double dip. We're not trying to do both, but we would like to get a full 3% for those staff attorneys. We are having increased retention challenges. We lost 4 of those 18 in the last year, including going to big firms and going to other courts where, frankly, the pace and the rate of constructive criticism may be more acceptable. And so the number we would need to hit 3% would obviously be much less after consideration of the 2,000, but we would still ask for that, and we can follow up with that. That difference is $79,000. So, and then finally, there we have a proposed 3% salary adjustment for administrative assistants. If the $2,000 is funded, that would address that, and we would not need that line item. And then the final request here is 10.1.9, funds to upgrade the Supreme Court docket system. This number actually just reflects sort of half of what would be needed, but we don't need it at all if the House recommendation that we're very grateful to you all for keeping in, the amended goes
Right.
through. The House position funded the entire thing. If that sticks, we don't need this money.
Okay.
I also have the answers to each of your questions.
Oh,
If
well, I should have known the Supreme Court would have been on top of it.
can go over those now, can go back and just enter them into
No,
the
if
Google
if we could
spreadsheet.
just get a copy of it.
Yeah. We'll go back and make sure it's entered into the Google
Okay.
spreadsheet. Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions we can
Do you
address?
have any questions? Well, y'all did a superb job. That's unusual not to have any questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate you.
Court of Appeals.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the kindness you've shown to us during this process, and this will sound not too far off of what you just heard. Going to the tracking sheet, I'll jump right in. We also had a request for a 3% salary adjustment. We emailed back the answers to the questions. The $2,000 would be wonderful, and that would take care of us. I would ask, based on my friend Justice Peterson's mention that they were still seeking the 3%, if you do 3% there, to just maybe consider it for our people. That's not because they don't need it, it's because we really try to maintain parity so that staff attorneys are not going back and forth between the courts. But we're happy with whatever we get. That's all.
I think we all up here realize that it's getting real tough in today's environment to keep attorneys in state government. I mean, the pay and the benefits are outweighed in the private sector. And I mean, the Attorney General was up here yesterday, and he's losing them right and left. And I don't know what we're going to do, but you know, if we're going to stay in business, we have to pay people adequately if we intend to keep them.
Yes, sir. Well said. I remember that back in the days when those jobs were sought after, and some of the numbers in all the agencies are pretty extraordinary. Public defenders, ADAs, our court.
Well, I reminded him yesterday, I stole 3 or 4 of them myself when I was a department head, and it didn't get a smile.
One item you will see 5.1.2, increase funds to reflect annual cyber insurance premiums. You will recall that in the amended budget, one of the first things that I did was to say that we can cancel that out. We have placed that in here. The simplest explanation is, as you heard last time, we took it out because our cyber audit came back great and we didn't need it. Here's the problem. The market on cyber security insurance fluctuates wildly, and we've been told, you know, you might need to be prepared for as much as a 200% increase. Now, that clearly didn't happen, and we were able to zero that money out. We hope that happens again. We have put that in this budget to be extra cautious in case our premiums come back. We've even heard talk of some carriers that are just getting away from insuring government at all when it comes to cyber, but we want to keep it. And so with any luck, we come back in the amended budget and we're able to say we had a good audit, our premiums didn't go up, but that's where that figure comes from.
Would that be a full year's worth
Yes, sir.
based on today's insurance premium?
That actually is a cautious number that factors in about 150% increase.
Okay.
It's a worst-case scenario number, very
Okay.
much a worst-case scenario number. John, would that be an accurate way of putting that? Okay. Sorry, that's Mr. Ruggieri, our IT person.
I understand.
And then, just like Justice Peterson said, Mr. Chairman and members, you'll see that $900,000 figure in 5.1.5. Y'all were kind enough to include our full upgrade. That number was there for this budget in case we only got half.
Right.
It goes away if the Senate
Right.
version sticks. And those are all the specifics that I had a note to make sure and highlight. And I'll be quiet and take your questions, but
I don't see any questions so far. Anybody got a question? Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Judge Rickman, I'm curious in terms of the cyber issue, certainly understand what you're saying, but what is the exposure to the state if there was a cyber issue? I'm familiar with that from the business context, but I'm not familiar with it with respect to the court. If you could shed some light on that.
sure. So for us, the coverage would include all the mitigation efforts, all of the data recovery. John, you want to come up just so I don't say anything inaccurately? The potential exposure to us, in particular with the filing deadlines, if the docket system shuts down due to cyber attack and we couldn't get it going again, since we're electronic filing now, it's sort of a catastrophe, for lack of a better term, with all the filing deadlines. And so the policy, to your question, would cover all the remediation, all the fixes, up to, what are our policy limits? $1 million? 2.5 million?
You're welcome to go to the podium if you want.
Yes, so it's 2.5 million. It covers everything from hardware destruction, because you can also loot, they can also hack and destroy your hardware. Any type of notifications. So we have public identifiable information about every attorney and every person. They would all have to be notified. There might be, we don't have credit card information and that type of thing, but you still, by law, have to notify people. So we would cover all of that sort of reputation stuff. It's an extensive program. We use the same broker the DOAS did for all the executive branch agencies, and we have a similar coverage and type thing.
From a liability standpoint, I wouldn't know how to answer because of the sovereign immunity issues, and I shouldn't pontificate clearly as a judge, but, so, for example, to your question, it was about $2 million that we had in the budget to rebuild the docket and do everything. That gives you a sense of the scale if the entire docket was shut down.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Would you even be able to rebuild? Would you lose significant information? I mean, that's, if you put it all electronically on there and you lose all those case files, I don't know how you would ever recover. Good.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? If not, we appreciate you.
Thank y'all very much.
Juvenile courts. Next up is juvenile courts.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members. I'm Kirsten Wallace. I'm the Budget Director for the Council of Juvenile Court Judges. And with me is our Executive Director, Eric John. I'll just jump right into the document. We are in section number 7. And the request that we have is actually a continuation from the amended budget 23. And we're requesting $25,000 for the grants to counties, and it's pursuant to Code Section 151152. This was a new judgeship that started as of January 1st, 2023. Mr. Chairman, that's our only request. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Anybody got any questions? Representative Bruce.
And I don't know if this is the time to ask it, but this point system that we keep hearing about, with these kids, if they commit a crime of some sort and they don't have enough points, they let them go and send them back home. Is that everywhere in the state, or is that county by county? How is that set up?
Yeah, so we've developed with a bunch of collaborators on it is this point system you're talking about, and it does apply to the whole state, but we are updating it every so often. So depending on the number of points that each particular offense has been assigned, then that child can be detained or sent home.
Are the counties required to use this point system, or
They're
is
supposed
it
to.
optional
They're supposed to, and then there's the override. Every judge has the discretion to override.
to override what
Right.
they come up with?
And that might, well, I'm assuming that's what you're referring to.
Yeah,
maybe.
well, what has happened is the kids, some of them have figured out, okay, I got 10 points, you got 5, so you commit this crime and you'll get off, and I won't.
Right.
And they're collaborating. I was just trying to figure out.
And
what
that's
was
where
happening
we're
with that.
hopeful that then the judge will override, depending on the facts of the case. And then we're doing a better job of, as a state, with a program that's called Juvenile Data Exchange, we're doing a better job of having a database of the kids so that we don't have somebody fall through the cracks because we didn't have any information on them. So, and that's kind of live, and it gets a lot of hits every day. So I know Judge Gunter probably remembers in the days when we just had to wait around and wait for a file to come in. Well, now the judge or the staff or the probation officers and even the DAs in some respect can look up a child and say, oh, okay, there's something in another county. Because that's the problem. They move around counties and it's hard to.
And just one last thing. Is this a cost-saving activity, or is this trying to keep the kids out of jail activity? Which is it?
I think a little of both. I think the goal is not to have the wrong child in detention, to have the ones that need to be in detention, which is a cost saving as a result of it.
Okay,
and
thank
bed
you.
space and all that stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious, recognizing that there could be variances across circuits, can you tell us a little bit about how you're doing in terms of the flow of cases and backlogs and things like that?
The juvenile courts, for a couple of reasons, did not have any backlogs accrue during the COVID. One, because of our strict timelines, and then two, is we already had a rule in place before anybody else about doing video and Zooming. What we ended up doing was enhancing that rule by providing, I know one of our judges, they had phones and other video streaming to be able to enhance a simple kind of situation via video. But we already had when the Supreme Court and the groups that were working on providing a proper rule, the juvenile courts had already had a rule in place for video streaming. We just enhanced it with the technology we were able to obtain. And to pay special attention about the thing that concerned most people is the attorney there with the child and able to communicate with the child and vice versa, to where there's no constitutional impediment.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Judge?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Remind me how the pay for juvenile judges is set up.
Okay, write this down. So, prior to 2000, juvenile court judges were funded by the counties. In 2000, the state decided to put in some state funding for judges' salaries, and it was a method of grants. So the formula is very simple, and then it gets technical. So right off the bat, every circuit gets 100,000. It started out at 85,000.
And that covered what? That 100,000?
Just whatever that state money was to cover the salary. That wasn't enough. The county was still having to put in. So
Oh, but that covered just the judge, not an
no
AA
staff.
or anything
It
like
said
that?
for salaries only, because we were afraid that monies would be taken. So you have immediately every circuit gets $100,000. Then, here's where it gets complicated. Every circuit that has more than 4 Superior Court judges, for each Superior Court judge, over 4, they start to get a quarter more. So if you have 5, you get a quarter. If you have 6, so it on and on. So what happens is your big circuits that have the more Superior Court judges, they get a lot of the money, much more than maybe a rural area where it might have 2 or 3 judges, and that 100,000 is going to stay the same forever unless you, the legislature, change it. That's the only negative thing that I saw, and that the ones that needed the money didn't get it over 100,000. Some counties just don't put in any money at all. So we have like 6 or 8 circuits where the judge is only getting paid 100,000. And we had one circuit, and I don't mean to badmouth anything, but they were taking the 100,000, they were using it for FICA and other stuff. And we were pointing to the code section that said, no, it's supposed to be salary, because in the end, that judge was it was a full-time judge, was only making like 64, 65,000. The rest was being taken for benefits and FICA, but we got that straightened out with the county, and they fixed that.
Okay, so you said there was about 6 or 8 that are just the 100,000.
Right.
All right.
How
Is
many,
there
like, for example, in I don't remember your circuit, how many Superior Court judges?
3?
3. So Jeremy Clow, he's only getting 100,000 plus anything that the county might be putting into his full salary.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that they are doing that.
Right.
And how long has that system been in place for that 6 or 8? In other words, that are just getting 100,000. They're stuck there.
Yeah, right. Well, it started in 2000. It was 85. So for a lot of years, some judges were only making 85. Then we made an effort. Representative Johnny Caldwell helped us a few years back to get that increase to 100,000.
Mhm.
But so those circuits where they were making 85,000, the judge at least got a raise up to 100,000. So that, they were appreciative of
It's
that.
been in place 10 years
Well,
with no change?
the 2000 was the first time it started, and then we changed it in 2015, I believe.
2015.
So we haven't had any sort of increase in that formula since then.
And we were talking about turnover. What is your turnover rate for judges? Do you know?
Well, I mean, I like to say we have a good contingency of veteran judges, 20, 30 years, and then we have judges. I don't think, and I've been the director since '95, I don't think we lose judges to lawyer jobs or anything like that. If we lose judges who move on to the Superior Court,
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
oh yeah, or they retire.
Any other questions? Okay, we appreciate it. Thank you.
y'all.
Next up are Superior Courts.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Chairman Hitchens, members of the committee. I'm Art Smith. I'm a Superior Court judge in the Chattahoochee Circuit, Columbus, and I currently serve as President of the Council of Superior Court Judges. It's in that capacity that I have the privilege of presenting our budget this afternoon. Referring the committee to page 5 of 24 of the Superior Court FY24 budget request tracking sheet, section 9.2, Judicial Administrative District Programs. As you know, our budget is actually 3 budgets in one. The first is the Judicial Administrative District Program budget, where we're asking for $12,959 to provide for a 6-step for the judicial assistant who serves each district court administrator. So for a total adjustment, upward adjustment of $12,959. Moving to 9.3, the Superior Court Judges Program budget. The first item 9.3.1 is actually a decrease in funds to reflect the adjustment to the employer contribution for the judicial retirement system from 8.03% down to 6.9%, reflecting the performance of that fund. That is in the amount of $350,678. 9.32 annualizes the cost of the new judgeship, which was approved in the 2022 legislative session for the South Georgia Circuit in the amount of $210,400. A like amount reflected at 9.3.3 for the cost of a new judgeship for the Blue Ridge Circuit, which was likewise created during the 2022 session. And moving to 9.3.4, annualizing the cost of the new judgeship for the Mountain Circuit, which was likewise created by the 2022 legislative session at an amount of $210,400. 9.3.5 provides for funds for the creation of one additional judgeship in the Daugherty Circuit effective July 1 of this year, reflecting a cost of $428,138. Likewise, 9.3.6 provides funding for one additional judgeship in the Coweta Circuit, likewise $428,138. 9.3.7 providing similar funding for one additional judgeship in the Atlantic Circuit. 9.3.8 provides funds to increase the number of senior judge days by 6 senior judge days per active judge. During the 2020 legislative session, during the early uncertain days of the pandemic, 94% of the budget in that category was reduced in the amount of $1,875,000. Additional funding was provided by the General Assembly in FY22 to provide senior judges at the current level, which is 9 senior judges per active judge. This request would bring us to an additional 6 senior judge days per active days for FY24. 9.3.9 provides funds for the creation for addition of a sixth step for judicial assistants, recognizing that currently judicial assistants max out at 17 years. We have a number of judicial assistants who've been with the Superior Courts for more than that period of time, and also recognizing that we have a turnover of almost 20% a year in judicial assistants. We believe that this $691,281,000 would be a strong recruiting and retention tool for the Superior Courts. 9.3.10 provides for funds to increase the court reporter's contingency expense and travel allowance. The request is $496,320. This was last adjusted approximately 30 years ago. As many of you know, court reporters are in short supply. We've had instances where we've had senior judges available to handle matters, criminal matters, but had no court reporter to take down the proceedings as required by law. This would double the figure that is say 30 years old, and would act as a strong recruiting and retention tool for us in keeping our court reporters. The next three line items, 9.3.11, reflects a reduction in the initial equipment setup for the Ogeechee Circuit, which was created in the 2020 legislative session. Likewise, 9.3.12 provides for a reduction in the initial equipment cost for the new judgeship in the Flint Circuit, which was authorized and created by the 2020 legislative session, again in the amount of $30,250. And finally, 9.313 recognized a reduction in the initial equipment setup cost for a newly created judgeship in the Cobb Judicial Circuit, also authorized by the 2020 legislative session, and likewise a reduction of $30,025. I was remiss in not introducing Charles Miller, who's seated to my left, who is our budget director, and also acknowledging Judge Lawton Stevens, who's here for moral support, and our executive director, Shannon Weathers. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Our central staff has answered the questions that were submitted and is prepared to submit them in the morning as requested.
You already answered one. We were discussing a little while ago how long it had been since the court reporters got that raise. I know they travel a lot, and I live in a rural area, and I have a friend that's a court reporter who has complained to me about it previously. So I didn't realize it had been 30 years. So
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it's been a long period of time.
and I know how essential they are. You're out of business if you don't have one. So.
Absolutely correct.
We have any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your consideration.
Prosecuting attorneys.
Afternoon, Chairman. Just thank you for inviting me on this lovely Valentine's Day to present before this esteemed committee. I can feel the love coming our way already. So,
Well, I appreciate you being here. I saw you on TV the other day, and my wife thought you were just wonderful.
well, thank you. Tell her I said thank you.
Solved a great case. So.
I have with me Mike Holloman. Mike is the executive director for the Council of Superior Court Clerks, and there's a special project. This is a pass-through. It's item 8.1 on our budget, page 98. So I will let Mike talk about the pass-through.
Thank you. As Pete mentioned, my name is Mike Holloman. I'm the Executive Director for the Council of Superior Court Clerks. Last year, the legislature passed Senate Bill 441. that reconstituted the Criminal Data Exchange Board that had originally been created under Governor Deal. And you reconstituted that CDX board as an advisory board to the Council of Superior Court Clerks. Section 1, literally almost the first line of that bill, sums up why I'm here today. That Section 1 states, the state's current system for sharing criminal case data is not adequate. And I think anybody who's familiar with the situation since 2007 realizes that. A large number of criminal dispositions are not getting into our criminal data system. I'll talk about a few of those reasons in just a moment. So our appropriations request is really composed of two pieces. There's an increase in our base budget of 200, it's 199,998 or something. That is to recognize that this is a problem that is ongoing, has been ongoing for 15 years, and will continue to be a problem because there are over 3,000 entities reporting criminal data, from law enforcement through the prosecutors to the courts. The turnover among all of those entities is the same as it is with the rest of the world. 20, 30% turnover. We've got to put in place not a Band-Aid this year or next year. We've got to recognize that we need to continually train the ground level, the local agencies, in what they need to do, because often we find that people aren't willfully not reporting information. It's that they don't understand that it's their responsibility to do that. So that is simply to give us a start where we can coordinate training efforts among mostly law enforcement, prosecutors, and clerks of Superior Court. So that's that piece. The other increase, which is, I believe now would be 1.5 million, we have proposed from the beginning that in order to track a case from arrest through disposition, that there needs to be a system in place that provides an avenue for all of these affected entities to log into and see what's happened from the moment an arrest is made, fingerprints are taken, OBTS forms are transmitted up to GCIC. What happens, because oftentimes that arrest charge doesn't even get started, so it falls in the ditch right from the very beginning. There has been in existence since 2007 a hub. Well, let me back up. Since 2001, the courts have been mandated to transmit their disposition data through a hub that was originally created and staffed by the clerk's authority. That's because in 2001, they were the only entity in the state that had a network adequate to provide that service. There are currently over 200 courts transmitting 30,000 dispositions a month through that hub. Now, that hub is a very basic, it doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles on it. We have taken some of the money from last year's appropriation, which is about $345,000. And what we've done is to enhance that hub to provide report generating capabilities. And some of those reports, and we're rolling that out later this week, would be an unfixed OTN report. And I'm sorry for acronyms, but they are everywhere. OTN is the offender tracking number. A transaction summary report, a transmission history, and the CCH rejection, CCH being the GCIC's network. It will classify the type of rejection that it's doing. We'll give these reports back to every court who participates. This hub is actually sort of in danger. Senate Bill 441 removed the statute that said the courts will transmit through this hub. They continue to do so because it's the most effective way for the courts to get that in. We think that hub needs to be rehomed. It needs to be moved and placed in a permanent capacity under the council and the CDX board to provide information to that board and to clerks of court. So I've got voluminous data on this. I'll be glad to answer any questions. The hub is critical. Again, 30,000 dispositions a month are going through that. We don't need that to collapse and go away. So we're proposing with that additional money to establish a base for it that's permanent and that provides hopefully additional reports, and ultimately that not only courts would report through this hub, aspirational, that both law enforcement and prosecutors could tie into it, and then it becomes really useful as a tool for the local DA, the local clerk, and law enforcement to all have access to the status of any given arrest charge all the way through disposition.
Judge?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Holloway, my time as DA and judge, the GCIC reports that I looked at were getting more and more unreadable. And it makes me think that whoever it is that's writing the software to do that doesn't know anything about the criminal justice system in Georgia. I mean, how do y'all put that together? Where does the software come from?
Well, first of all, that report comes from GCIC, not from us. We are,
But the information
the
flows
hub,
through.
it flows through.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you asked me that question, because among the other things that the enhancements that we are doing right now to the hub is to create a more readable report. I wouldn't go so far as to say GCIC is not conversant with what we all need, but they're not as sensitive to it as the people who have to read that report. And that's the court clerk, judges, prosecutors. It is hard to read. It comes in, it's disjointed. The charges can be at different places throughout the thing. So one of the things we've done is to clean up that report with our current enhancements.
Okay.
But we didn't have any money or ability to make these enhancements in years past. We just took what we got from GCIC and passed it straight through.
In our circuit, the local clerk's office would do the entry of information into that system. A lot of times they would try to input the information and it would be rejected.
Correct.
Any fix for that? Because that's what delays and causes them a lot of grief.
I mean, that is really the whole thrust of what we're doing, is literally addressing that issue. There's over 20% of all dispositions are rejected, as you just pointed out. 60 to 65% of the rejections that we get currently from GCIC involve what they call CTN count mismatch. And that is the original arrest, count 1, count 2, count 3, does not match the disposition, count 1, count 2, count 3, because prosecutors change the order of the charges and often change what they choose to prosecute over what the arresting officer entered when they booked them into the jail. And then finally, the courts, of course, sentence on, after a hearing, on what you're convicted of. So at each stage, as those counts are altered, both the order of the counts and the actual charge itself changes. If that doesn't match, when the clerk of courts transmit the disposition, it gets rejected.
Right.
And that is the overwhelming majority of the reasons.
And a lot of times, the people doing the entry can't understand what the rejection's about, and that's what causes the delays and the
There are
problems.
coding issues, there are undisposed charge issues. The coding issue, CCH, again, GCIC, requires numerical codes for a lot of its information. Charge codes, sentence codes, disposition codes. Many of these codes are on a GCIC provided list, but they get updated regularly and they're changed. In fact, some of the codes that are used are for only a limited time. So it's very confusing. And the clerk of court, being the end of the process, has really suffered over this last 15 years the majority of the burden for figuring out what went wrong, even though in many instances they don't have the information, because
Right.
how do you know about something that didn't happen? Or there's some contradiction with something law enforcement. I mean, think about in Fulton County, if the court here in Fulton County were alerted that there was a problem with law enforcement, I mean, are they just gonna pick up a phone and call Sheriff Labatt's office and say, hey, it's a massive problem, which is what the hub, if it tracked all of this data, would address, because that data would be there from the beginning and accessible to prosecutors, clerks, law enforcement, so that we could see where it broke down. You'd see a charge come along to a certain point and then it disappears. Well, what happened? Somebody didn't report it up. Well, guess what? If it gets through and gets to a disposition, it can't match up.
All right,
There's-
last question, I promise.
Okay.
Is there any other state that does it well?
Mr. Chairman, part of the marching orders that the legislature gave the CDX board was to develop standards where we're all basically operating off the same manual. One of the first questions I asked at the first meeting is there any state that does it well? And I think we can answer, we don't know the answer to that question right now.
Okay. You understand my frustration? I'm not doing this anymore, but still, I'm frustrated
Yeah.
with how that's out
The
there.
difficulties, we found a report on the National Center for State Courts that compare, there's two ways you track, by case or by charge. Case tracking is simple. You just dump one bucket into another. Charge tracking is what we want to do here and have tried to do since 2007, is the thing that causes all of this matching to take place. The report states basically that everybody has difficulty. There is value. I think certainly GCIC believes that there's value in doing charge tracking. Pardons and paroles at a recent meeting suggested they would like to keep charge tracking. But there's nobody that does it perfect, let's put it that way. And the states where it's done the best, like the current system, as I understand, came from either Maine or Massachusetts. It was one of those Northeast M states. They have like 14 counties and a unified judicial branch. We have a lot more than 14 counties and we don't have a unified judiciary. So what's difficult in a small state with a unified becomes exponentially harder in a state like Georgia with
Well,
hundreds of
Part of
elected.
my experience was with Tracker, what we had before Tracker, and then had to get rid of that, throw it out, because it was I'll call it a store-bought from out of state that didn't
Yeah.
work. And we ended up having to draft our own software to build a system that does work. And I don't know if y'all thought about that, but it seems to me that works pretty well, but you gotta train the personnel that's actually drafting that software.
I'll tell you, the hub that we're proposing is very cheap as regards to building a whole new system. And by the way, it's not a replacement or anything of the sort for the GCIC network. It does not propose to be a public-facing site. It is only for the members of the CDX board to utilize in making this happen. And it's very simple. Y'all may have heard of CGIP. That was a previous effort to connect at the local level computer systems. CGIP, which we used to call JDX back in the '08 era, is a very good thing. The problem with it is it's very time consuming and very expensive. We were told when we talked to GTA right after Senate Bill 441 that if we intended to continue CEGIP, to not even start without $25 million and the expectation that it was going to take 4 to 5 years to get significant implementation. While I still think that's a valuable project, that's not what we're doing here. For $1.5 million, we can build a hub that going forward solves a whole lot of the problems.
How is that funded, the CDX and all that? How does that come in?
It comes in through the council Superior Court clerk's budget.
Okay, it's their budget, not a fee system that they.
It's not a fee system, no.
Okay, thank you.
This is not a project or a recommendation from CDX board at this time. I think there were some signals received that perhaps the legislature wasn't ready to continue this. I put it in our budget simply because I believe it, and I think it needs to be on the table. If the House or the Senate chooses to not provide the funding, so be it. But I felt like Senate Bill 441 told the clerks, propose a solution, and we're proposing what we think is the best solution. The good point, Pete mentions the standards. We did adopt standards per the statute back in the first week of January. And one of the ways that the standard attempts to address this issue is by requiring GCIC to accept criminal dispositions regardless of all of this charge mapping. If we send them a valid, legitimate, court-ordered sentence and there's no issues with that disposition, they've got to put it in the system. Now, that doesn't say they can't continue to try and do the things they're doing now, but at least it gets the disposition into the system. What it doesn't do, and what I think our hub would certainly help, it doesn't allow them to amend these charges. And they would have to administratively resolve these outstanding charges, because I've mentioned this repeatedly. There's two problems with the dispositions being rejected. Number one, the disposition, the lawful sentence, doesn't get into the public record. But also, the charges are not resolved. So you could have a sentence, you could have been absolved, you could have been found not guilty. But yet, because these charges aren't matched up and reconciled, you still show out, if you do a background check on somebody who was found innocent in court and the process didn't administratively resolve those charges, they're hanging out there because they come to our office when they were rejected for a job or a scholarship or a professional license. They come to us and they say, hey, I've still got these charges out there. About all we can do is give them a copy of the official court record, and then they take it to whoever has rejected them and say, see?
I'm sorry, that's all I have. Thank you.
Well, I know a little bit about it and very little, and I appreciate you coming and trying to explain it to me. I don't know that I grasped all of it, but certainly it needs some resolution, and I'm on board with that. I've tried to read them before too, and you know, I spent 43 years in law enforcement. I couldn't understand all of them, and if we fund this, you believe that it's going to clear it up from from the court side?
Well, you're never going to eliminate human error, but
No,
this
I
will give us a
understand that.
tool that we can communicate amongst ourselves, because people ask me, where is it working in Georgia? And I can tell you, every place that you see where a court is getting this done successfully, it's where the DA and the clerk and law enforcement are working together, and they're making it happen. But that does not happen in every jurisdiction across the state. But where it's successful, it's because the DA and the clerk and local law enforcement have decided to make it work, and they communicate.
Okay, moving on to district attorneys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mike. Mr. Chairman, I have with me Chris Jones, who is our Chief Financial Officer at the Prosecuting Attorney's Council, and Bert Poston, who is the District Attorney for the Conasauga Judicial Circuit. Bert is also a member of the PAC Council, as well as our Budget Chair. So I will turn the first part over to them, and then I'll take up the part about PAC.
Welcome.
I will start on 8.3.1, which is funding for promotional step increases for the assistant district attorneys who qualify for those. As you know, our assistant DAs are paid on a pay scale that has 4 classes and multiple steps. They come out of law school, they start at class 1, step 1 at about $56,000. If they stick with us for 20, 25 years or so, they end up at the top of that pay scale, currently at about 110. And so in order to maintain a career track for prosecutors, in addition to any cost of living increases or any of those things, we also have this promotional track if they're doing what they're supposed to do. And so that $2 million is based on our estimates of how many ADAs would qualify in the coming year. Ultimately, it's the elected district attorney that decides to give them that promotion based on the criteria that they set, but in terms of the amount of time in office, in service that would make them at least eligible for it. That's where the numbers come from. So that is just to give that single step increase or class promotion as appropriate.
Does that, excuse me, does that add an additional step, or is that just money that you're going to include in the steps?
That money would go towards, so if someone is at class
Top
1,
level.
step 1, and they've been there for over a year, and their DA gives them a promotion, they would move up to step 2. And that would be however much of an increase that would be. Or if they're far enough up in a class and they're eligible to move up to the next class, it's a different amount depending on where you are
Okay.
on the scale, but
Right.
it would fund those.
But it doesn't create an extra step?
No, the
Okay.
scale, the top of the scale
Okay.
stays where it is, the bottom of the scale stays where it is. It's
Okay.
purely moving people on that scale that are eligible to move up the scale over time. So that's, that's that funding. Item number 8.3.2 is to provide funding to create a new position of a state-paid victim advocate, 50 of those, one in each of the 50 judicial circuits. If you're not aware, victim advocates, currently there are no state-funded victim advocates in terms of state general fund paying for those. They are paid primarily out of VOCA funding coming from
Right.
CJCC with matching county funds or additional county funds.
Which
as
is
may be
almost
available.
broke.
Hmm.
Which is almost broke.
Correct. And so in my office, I have 9 total advocates that are paid almost entirely by that grant. Funding for that grant's been cut over the last 2 or 3 years. It's been patched up by CJCC using other funds like ARPA money that's about to run out. And so when ARPA runs out, if the feds don't fix the VOCA grant and put more money in there, then we're going to start losing personnel. And so the idea is to get ahead of that a little bit and start replacing some of that with state funds, and with the idea of then freeing up money for CJCC. Like in my office, I have 9 advocates. I wouldn't be getting a 10th. I would simply be replacing one of those with
Right.
state funding to free up the CJCC money.
Yeah,
for
we
other
had to make
purposes.
a substantial appropriation and amended budget to help the crime victims fund. I mean, it was, and they had another issue too, but they really have significant problems with funding right now. And you very obviously are aware of it. And
Certainly. We're fortunate. Georgia has what I think is the best crime victim bill of rights in the entire country. Our advocates are with victims before an arrest is even made in many cases, through the entire process, through the crime victim compensation program, all the way up until years in the future when they're offenders being considered for parole. So we have, in some cases, really a lifetime commitment to these victims, and we're very concerned about the potential of losing personnel if we can't find an alternate funding source to the VOCA grant and start moving forward on that. So that's a huge need and a potentially huge loss to the victims of the state if we lose that VOCA funding and don't pick it up elsewhere. Moving on, 8.3.3 is an adjustment based on the employment retirement system contribution rate changing. And so that just reflects additional cost to us based on a change that is beyond our control. 8.3.4 is funding for increases to software licensing that runs through the Prosecuting Attorney's Council, but goes to primarily the smaller, more rural DA's offices in counties that don't have like an IT department. So like in my circuit, I have a large county and a small county. Whitfield County has a very good IT department, so we don't get any kind of support from PAC for our IT needs there. Murray County has virtually nothing, and so in more areas like that, the Prosecuting Attorney's Council funds email and Microsoft Office and things like that to help those offices.
Isn't Microsoft Office about to go away?
It's changing and the licensing is changing, Peter, or,
Beginning in October, they'll no longer support the 2016 version, and so that's what this is going to address.
And I think that's what all of us have.
so that's that item. The next item, 8.3.4, I'm sorry, 8.3.5 is the, to annualize the cost of assistant DAs that were added last year connected to new judgeships. So last year, those were added for a half a year, and that's the additional funding to go into the base budget for the full year funding for those assistant DAs. And of course, I would point out, like every year, we don't know in advance what new judgeships may be created, so we don't include in our budget request for the ADAs to go with those. But there are some judgeships in process, and if any of those get approved, then we would obviously be able to provide the funding numbers that you would need to plug into our budget as well for the ADAs that go with those judges.
And we have provided it for the 4 ADAs that are pending. Courtney has the numbers for those.
Okay.
The next item, 8.3.6, is Chris may be able to explain that a little better than I am, but it has to do with the Department of Human Services and a contract that we have to provide ADAs to child support offices. And so that is a transfer between those two budgets, as I understand it.
Yes, not a transfer, but what this is the same request we had in the amended budget for the DHS child support contract. This just gets it into the base budget. And it's not state funds, this is just the contract with DHS.
Okay, thank you. The remaining items within the District Attorney's program are all related to a new conflict case program that also has funding items in the Prosecuting Attorney's Council program budget. And so I'm going to leave those for Pete to address because they're connected to one another rather than trying to split that up. So if there's no other questions about the matters I've covered already, I'll turn it over to Pete.
I don't see any questions.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think the easiest way to look at 8.3.7, 8.3.8, 8.3.9, and also 8.4.4, 0.45, 0.46, and 0.47 is to discuss them all at once, and then we can break them out. But HB 409 last year shifted the appointment process when you have a conflict case from the Attorney General to the Prosecuting Attorney's Council. There were no funds attached to that additional job that PAC took on. In July 1, we began handling conflict cases. And for those of you that don't know what a conflict case is, and I think everybody knows here, is if Mr. Poston has a case in which he has a personal interest in it or relationship, he recuses his office from prosecuting the case. And once Mr. Poston is recused, the entire office is recused. And I neglected to mention, I have the Lookout Mountain Judicial Circuit, Chris Arndt, back there. So I'll use him in my hypothetical here. So if it goes to Chris Arndt takes on that case with the personnel he already has. He doesn't get additional personnel, obviously. However, the travel budget, as Mr. Arndt is going back and forth to Mr. Poston's circuit, comes out of Mr. Poston's budget. So that's going to be one issue. But here's the big issue. On July 1st, 2022, we took on 561 cases in a drop of the hat. That's cases that required conflicts. Since that time, we've been able to assign out 490 of them. We now have 84 different appointees who are taking on these cases. That is DA's offices, Solicitor General's offices, The Attorney General has taken on some of these cases, as well as the Prosecuting Attorney's Council. We've taken on some cases as well. We still have 71 cases that we need to find a prosecutor on. I will say out of the 490 cases that we've managed to find somebody to take those cases, of those, 275 are serious violent felonies. Now, I wish it were as easy that when Mr. Poston recused his office and Mr. Arndt took on a case, that somehow I could take a case away from Mr. Arndt and give it to Mr. Poston, but I can't do that. So not only does Mr. Arndt have his caseload that he's dealing with, he now has additional cases. And if it's a serious violent felony, obviously it does not move through the court system in a quick manner. It takes a lot of coordination with the judges in that circuit. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that a majority of our cases we're dealing with now are from the Chattahoochee circuit, where that DA, the former DA, was convicted, sent to prison. We have a new DA appointed by Governor Kemp. He was a defense attorney. He did a lot of work. We took on that responsibility of appointing cases, and the judges, the Superior Court judges in the Chattahoochee Judicial Circuit have been a pleasure to work with, scheduling hearings, most of them via Zoom, but making sure that these prosecutors would go back and forth, weren't spending a lot of time on the road. So what we're asking for in 8.37 is additional travel funds in the DA. And if we put all this under PAC program, I would be fine with it, but right now we have it kind of divided up into the part of it in the DA program. But we're asking for additional travel funds because it looks like we're quickly going to run out of funds once those courts open up and start going back and forth. Also, for trial expenses, once Mr. Poston recuses his case and gets out of it and it goes to Mr. Arndt, there's no cost to cover. How do we bill the trial expenses to get expert witnesses? How do we get prepared documents, demonstration pieces, things of that nature? We're asking for funds where the DAs can come to us and say, we need so much money for the purpose of creating case trial related expenses. And it could be witness subpoenas, it could be witness travel, it could be anything like that. So that's $165,000 we're asking for. Establish a new conflict case program to provide funds for private attorneys to support prosecution of conflict officers. This is where we're getting killed. We can only pay by statute a private lawyer $58 per hour. We cannot get a lawyer at $58 per hour. We have to change that statute, and I will be approaching someone to sponsor that so we can get it at least to an expense paid by the case. For example, a homicide case might be $7,500 to take on the case. A simple drug possession case might be $1,500. So we can get private attorneys interested. There are a number of lawyers, prosecutors, defense attorneys who would take a case as a conflict case as long as they're not losing money. At $58 an hour, they can't even break even. Then what I would like, and this is not a program that would stay in perpetuity, this is a program that would go away. I would like the ability to take on more conflict cases through PAC and not pass them on to the attorneys because I've already overloaded solicitor generals and DAs. So we're asking for funds to provide personnel services for 3 conflict prosecutors, 1 conflict investigator, 1 conflict victim advocate, and 1 conflict case legal assistant. I believe that as we get through this crush of this 272 serious violent felonies and these 490 cases, that over time we're going to see the conflict cases come down. We're going to see that COVID backlog kind of whittle away, and we'll be able to cut that program down. That is my hope, my sincerest hope. Plus, I hope to be able to triage some cases. Once Burt Poston conflicts out of a case, my lawyers could look at it and be able to say, okay, this case isn't worth prosecuting. We don't need to find a conflict lawyer. We'll just dismiss these charges or do something to triage them. That's what I'm asking for. And I can stop there. I keep going with the other requests that we have.
I have a question. I may be a little bit naive, but what was the reasoning for the sudden large number? Was that COVID?
Part of it was COVID. Part of it was there was a whole number of reasons. Part of it was COVID. A lot of it was when you say the number of conflict cases that were out there. The 2020 election brought in a number of new DAs, brand new DAs. So those created conflicts as well. And some of it was the DAs just didn't have the staff. We didn't cover this, but there's a 22% vacancy rate. And we're answering your questions, Mr. Chairman, that were sent out to us on that spreadsheet. We have a 22% vacancy rate in attorneys. Turnover rate, 22%. And that's just in the 462 prosecutors that the state provides. So, you know, when you have that type of turnover, you have small offices, you have a large caseload, and you may have some conflicts that just come up that way. I'll go on, unless you have a question about the conflict. I also have.
Any questions?
I have a couple of more matters I'd just like to present to you. We're
Sure.
also asking for.
Judge.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. The turnover rate was out of the district attorney's budget or out of the PAC?
Our turnover rate, Mr. Chairman, is 18% at PAC.
At PAC?
Yeah,
Okay.
so that was for the DAs. The 22% was the DAs.
Thank you.
Are you differentiating in your report so that we will understand it?
We can.
Okay.
In our PAC, we're also asking for funds for a director, a victim advocate director, who sets up all the trainings across the state. And that is VOCA funded as well. As y'all know, VOCA funding is drying up rather quickly, so we're asking for that. And this is not on our sheet, but it is something we are asking for. And Chairman Gunner mentioned it, Tracker. We're asking for $78,000 for support of Tracker, the ongoing support. We're also asking for $150,000 for system upgrades, and that'll go away in 2 years. We just need to make these upgrades over the next 2 years. The last time our Tracker system was upgraded was in 2015. Presently, Tracker's in 50 circuits. 48 of them use it extensively. Solicitor General's offices use them. Also, 3 state offices use them. GBI uses Tracker, PAC uses Tracker, and Attorney General uses Tracker. So we'd really like to make those upgrades because we're afraid if we don't make them now, it'll be much more costly in the future.
And those aren't shown on the tracking sheets, are they?
Those are not shown on the Tracker sheets. Go ahead.
The only other request we have under the Prosecuting Attorney's Council is 8.4.3, and that's for 2 training specialists. And that's to support the growing number of trainings that PAC is conducting throughout the state. Since 2018, we were doing roughly 121 trainings. Now in 2023, we're projecting 186. These are all in-house trainings that PAC is conducting or coordinating, which typically includes about 250 different trainers for those trainings.
And that's all you have?
That is the last of it, yes, sir.
Got one more question there. Judge?
Thank you. The training, y'all still do the Jekyll Island trip for the?
Yes, sir. We do 2 major trainings, winter conference and summer conference was at Jekyll Island. We also do a number of regional trainings, as well as we're now doing webinars. We also have the location at PAC, which you're quite familiar with, being the prior executive director there. So we do trainings on site there.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Any further questions? We certainly appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is the Department of Public Safety. You bought enough of you.
Figured I might need a little backup today, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. We submitted all the questions that you'd requested earlier today, so I think we've got all those answered for y'all.
Okay.
The Department of Public Safety's fiscal year 24 budget starts on page 22. And you'll see under field offices and services, line 3945, you'll see a reduction in field offices and services for 11.6 million. And this was based on the recommendations from OPB. And what we'll do is we'll create a new training program for law enforcement training in fiscal year 24. And these funds will be transferred to the new program for the purpose of tracking trooper school training. And then on line 3946.
What motivated that? Just to keep track of the monies?
Yes, sir. That, and there, of course, you're probably familiar, there was an audit that was done on our
I
trooper
heard there
school
was. I
training.
didn't-
So
I
I
didn't
think
know.
that was part of that discussion, just so we can get a better understanding and get better clarity on exactly how much we are spending in trooper school.
Okay.
And then on 3946, there's $2 million added for the ongoing service contracts and maintenance costs associated with a new statewide radio system that the governor's recommended in amended fiscal year 23. And then on line 3947, of course, we support the governor's recommendation for 10 additional K-9s in fiscal year 2024 as well. And then moving to,
Let me ask you about that.
Yes, sir.
We just put 10 in amended and now 10 more. Do you have the ability to have that many?
we think so. We've got quite a bit of interest across the state in troopers wanting the more additional K-9s because we've seen the benefit, particularly since we've added the dual purpose K-9 to our program. They've been very, very helpful and beneficial.
But
across the state.
what's the training time on those? I used to know, but
Well, the dual purpose K-9 is a little more extensive. They're a little more cost associated with them as well. I think the training program on them is about 12 weeks.
so you're gonna send 40 people through 12-week training?
Not all at one time. We
I knew that.
yeah, we stage it out based
Okay.
on the school and the capacity. So, and then on moving on to the law enforcement training course on line 3951, and that's the new program that we already mentioned associated with that $11.6 million. And I'll stop there and not go into the bonds unless you'd like me to do so, Mr. Chairman.
I don't think we need to hear that. Anybody got any questions? Well, that was pretty easy.
We like easy, Mr. Chairman.
Wasn't there something there for pilots we talked about? I do know that there's some governor's recommendation in the bonds for a couple of helicopters.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Do you have sufficient people now to fly them, or
We
these
do.
in addition, or the replacement, or?
Well, we've got currently we've got 10 aircraft that are flyable. We've got a total of 12 aircraft. 4 of those aircraft are federal surplus, and they're all from 1969, 70, 71, and 72. And so we'd like to get rid of those. I don't think anybody's real comfortable flying in helicopters that old this day and time. So the plan is to return those to surplus, because 2 of them are not even flyable. We use those for parts. So that leaves us with 5 407s and 1 429. And then, of course, we have a couple
two TH-67s that we use for training and training purposes only. It's a smaller aircraft, and they're much more efficient for training purposes. So the plan is for us to try to look at purchasing a 412 helicopter and maybe two 407s, and we're looking at slightly used aircraft, not particularly brand new, because that will save us a lot of money. We're looking at a 412 simply because of the capacity to be able to transport our SWAT team. They're being utilized a lot more around the state, and that'll give us that ability to move them literally from Atlanta to anywhere in the state without having to stop and refuel. And the 429 that we have now is our only hoist-capable aircraft, and we're seeing requests come more and more for us to go to the mountains and extract people out of the mountains. So when that helicopter's down or being used somewhere else, nobody else in the state has the ability to send an aircraft up there to get anybody off the mountain. So that'll give us those two capabilities as well.
Do either one of the big helicopters require two pilots, or
No, sir. No, sir.
even during hoisting events? You only,
Well, now during hoisting, it doesn't necessarily have to have two pilots, but it
Yeah,
certainly
you
has to
have a
have.
crewman.
We have to have a
Right.
crew, yes, sir.
Right. Okay. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Georgia firefighters and standards. And training. Welcome back.
Thank you, sir.
I know you're relatively new, and
I am.
we don't bite. So
Thank you, sir. I'm Randy Toms. For those that don't know me, I'm the Executive Director of Georgia Firefighter Standards and Training, where I've been there since March. I have a 38-year background in fire service and local government, and proud to be out of local government and back in the
weren't
fire
you the
service.
mayor of Warner Robins?
Yes, sir, for
I thought
8
you were.
years. And then I was a firefighter with the city of Warner Robins for 27 years and on the Firefighter Standards and Training Council for 7 years before I took this position. So our needs are pretty simple. We appreciate everything. We serve roughly 530 fire departments throughout the state and roughly about 27,000 firefighters throughout the state. And we have a small agency but a large mission. And I answered the questions that were sent out. And I did answer yes to, are there any needs that are not funded in the budget? And so I would just tell you that I would open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions for me about what those needs are, I would be glad to iterate those needs.
Well, so moved.
Yeah. Well, we have a need for vehicles. We have some vehicles that are.
Didn't we just give you some in the amended budget?
No, sir, not this amended budget. I had some in there already that we're trying to work on. Cars are hard to find right now, and especially at state vendor prices. You can't hardly get them, which is one of the things I had put in for $100,000 for 4 additional vehicles, and you can't get four vehicles for $100,000. So right now, after researching the inventory in local vendors, you're looking at about $160,000 for 4 vehicles. I would also ask that we have, this is not an additional funding, and I know that's a good part, is that we have $80,000 in our budget and have had it there for contract IT work, and I would like for that position to be switched over to a position as opposed to a contract, so that we can hire somebody to be there to run what is our biggest need in our agency, and that is the ACADIS Vector testing and database system that we're implementing. And the legislators have been so gracious to give us the funding we need to get that up in operation, and we're about ready to put it into operation throughout the state, but we need to have the funding, the annual cost for the upgrades and the maintenance of that system as we move forward, which is about approximately $275,000 on an annual basis for that system. And that's our biggest need. I did put in there that we had a 30% turnover. Unfortunately, that's been since I've been there, and we lost 2 to retirement. And so when you talk about 30% in a 10 to 12 person agency, it's not as bad as it sounds. But we did lose 3 people, one to another agency, another state agency, because he was able to go there for more money. And then we had 2 retirements of some of our higher paid employees. And so I was able to readjust some money around and affect some raises for our employees to make it better for them, to retain them. So we've done some really good work in our agency, and we have the Acatus Vector system, though, is our most pressing need. And because of the legislators, we've been able to purchase that system, but we've got to have it running. And it's going to keep up with firefighters, their training. Just for example, we're testing right now on bubble sheets and Scantrons, is what we're testing with throughout the state right now. And sometimes, depending on when it gets to our agency, we'd like to think that we can test them and have them graded by the time the tests arrive at our agency. We can grade them within 2 weeks. Well, the testing system through the Acatus Vector, when they take a test, which is one thing I want to do with my personnel, is put more out into the field testing, they will know as soon as they hit the submit button whether they passed or didn't pass the test. And so it's the system we need to move forward, and we're looking forward to implementing that for the fire service in the state.
Yeah, our records reflect that we did give you $100,000 in the amended budget for vehicles. I don't know whether you've seen it or not. It's gone over to the Senate.
Okay, all right. I don't remember seeing that, and I'm
Well,
sorry.
What kind of vehicles are they? Just standard?
Right now, we have, what we have in right now is the Ford Edge, and you just can't hardly find them right now. So we're looking to go with the Kia K5s, and they're being used throughout, a lot at Gypstick.
I see a lot of Kias. I think they're probably trying to help us.
Right. So that's what we're looking at now, is going with the Kia K5 sedans. The problem is for my people out in the field, my compliance specialists, they are going to be carrying around a pack with 20 computers so that they can test on site. And they can take a testing event anywhere in the state with those computers. So we have to make sure that the vehicle will carry that bank of computers as they go out testing.
And I see that they have a mid-sized vehicle too that's kind of like a SUV but smaller that I think some other agencies are buying.
Yes, sir. We're looking at that. I think is that the Sorrento?
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I just
we're looking at that as a source for our compliance specialists. Yes, sir.
any further questions? No. Okay, we appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. Peace officers, post council. I didn't even see you sitting over there.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Chairman, as you're aware, our budget for this year is fairly simple, fairly self-explanatory. The only issue that we have is, the $2,000 cost of living adjustment. It would be the only addition to our budget this year, which, with that said, I'd be happy to answer any questions. We've also answered the list of questions that you spent out. Just to talk about the $2,000 COLA, we would be short about $12,000, $12,307 on that. Our turnover rate is extremely low, as you know, because we have the luxury of hiring extremely seasoned investigators that work at post. So our turnover is less than 3%. That and everybody just likes me, apparently. You ask about capital needs, and you guys have been so gracious to give us that $75,000 to do something with the security at our building. As you know, it is woefully lacking right now. But other than that, with fees, we don't keep any fees. All the fees that we collect are turned over to the general coffer. We are 100% funded by our state budget. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
I don't see any questions, but I really was glad to see that you got some security enhancements. I was over there for 12 years, and I know that with what you do over there and some of the, it's like a courtroom, and some of the police officers or ex-police officers that don't get what they want, they sometimes express themselves pretty pretty openly.
And they stand to lose a lot. You know,
Oh, yeah.
we take a person's livelihood who has a 30-year career from them, and you worry about somebody doing something rash without thinking. And as you know, that building's mostly sheet glass and hollow core doors, and so we're really looking forward to being able to enhance that.
But they have beautiful floors.
They do. It's a beautiful building.
It is.
Absolutely.
No questions? We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
It's an old mill. Got wood floors and everything about that thick. Governor's Office of Highway Safety, you're the ones we've been looking for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that because you want to get out of here.
I wouldn't say that.
Valentine's is on the agenda.
We have some handouts.
Sure. Thank you. We're ready when you are.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and committee members, thank you for having us, allowing us to present today for the request of our FY '24 budget. The state funds that we are receiving through P&A, the Planning Administration, are assigned to 8 employees. All expenses incurred by these employees are paid through P&A. These 8 positions consist of the director, deputy director, executive administrative assistant, the finance director, 3 finance staff members, and our IT systems administrator. The majority of the appropriation budget, which is $612,545, which you can see on the track sheet on page 24 of 24, is that number at the top under state funds. That's why the Governor's Office of Highway Safety is now presenting the following increases to our budget to fund other P&A expenses for FY '24, totaling $74,921.58. These positions that we're going to be talking about, Mr. Chairman, I will, if you would allow my finance director, Ms. Laura Bolander, to further explain them, sir.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm loud enough. So we're first going to start with our request for funding for an additional staff member. We have the position already. We've had it since 2016. It's been open, but we haven't had any funds to fund that, so we are requesting that. And I went into detail there in that, telling you what that person would do and the increase in our grants that we already have slated for FY '24. So we're justifying that needed person in our department.
Did you fill out that form we sent out?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then I just went in to explain at the very bottom of this that like the director said, there's 8 employees that are under the P&A, so they're funded by you, and they're funded by match for the federal government. So that's why the amount that we want is exactly half of what the salary pledge plus the fringe would be for that position, totaling the $28,839.08. Any questions on that?
I don't see any.
Okay, so then we went on to talk about our other operating expenses. The 4 new laptops that we would need would be $4,500, and half of that would be $2,250. And that's part of the $74,000. And then the other thing that everybody likes to talk about is our travel. So we have put together our FY '24 travel and all the different conferences and all the different programs and all the different projects that we have lined up for 2024. And in order to be successful at these, we would need funding for the travel to get to there. So the travel costs, sorry, I didn't put the whole total. But if you go to the third page, it gives you a breakdown on how I got to the second page total. And it was like 85,000, I want to say, because our total, our travel request from you is 43,832.50. So there's an outline of what our travel is. Then the last page is a breakdown of what the projected cost would be for that travel for FY24, and then that would be for the whole year.
And Mr. Chairman, just let me add to that. NHTSA is using Georgia as a pilot. We stand to receive in excess of $40 million over the next 4 years, and that's why that position is dearly needed. And we also are a pilot when it comes to including a town hall type meeting setting so that we can go out and make sure that we engage with all the different stakeholders that can help us reach that goal of reducing crashes, injuries, and fatalities. And sir, you well know the speaker have convened a committee to look at the numbers that continue to escalate. And so we're doing all that we can do to combat these rise in crashes, injuries, and fatalities. And keep in mind the 634,000, that's just the tip of the iceberg of what we actually receive from the feds. We receive in excess of $20 million that opens the door. And so we want to impress on you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee that $634,000 give us access to over $20 million. So if it's anything that you guys can see, and ladies, to help us with that, combating these numbers, which they are on the wrong path, we greatly would appreciate it. And I yield the floor to any questions.
Didn't we fund 4 computers in the amended budget? 3?
Yes.
We got 4.
It was 4, I listed 3 accidentally.
Okay. What about, and with regard to the federal funding, do you provide a 25-cent match for that?
It's Mr. Chairman, it's a dollar for dollar match.
Dollar for dollar?
Yes, sir.
So the more money you get, the more federal money you can get?
Yes, sir. So we actually leave.
To what limit?
We actually leave $1 million on the table.
15%. I have to say that we can't spend any more than what you give us. He's telling you about all the money that we have access to, but we cannot, absolutely not spend any of the federal money. We have to match it for what you have, and so that's why we come to you with half figures, if you know what I mean.
Any questions? What about the, Representative Holcomb?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you tell us a little bit about what you specifically do to reduce traffic fatalities on our roads?
Sir, we partner with different agencies, whether it's the state or private entities, public health, the University System of Georgia. We educate the people on proven measures of how we can reduce crashes, injuries, and fatalities on the Georgia roadways.
Can you give us some examples?
Well, one thing we do, we try to teach them not to use the phone. Put the phone down, obey the speed limit, obey the laws of the highway. We bring awareness to, when it comes, click it or ticket. We got different campaigns, click it or ticket. If you drive impaired, you're gonna be arrested and taken to jail. We got a number of federal campaigns that we have to do throughout the year. And we don't do it, our 28 people, we're not law enforcement, so we partner with different agencies throughout the state, whether it's the state patrol, the local sheriffs, or the local city police.
Okay.
But you
Thanks.
do,
I'd like to also add that we enlist the media, so we have a lot of media campaigns, and they are extremely expensive, but we have, when you drive down the road, you'll see the different signs that we use media to educate as well.
Do you have any evaluation measures?
Yes, we, if I understand your question, we have proven measures how we have impacted motoring public to save lives, and because of the pandemic, we feel like the reason why those numbers are escalating is because people have been, shut down for 2 years, and they're just out, and we seeing triple-digit speeds.
Yeah.
Also,
We do have some recorded on our website as well,
And-
but we can provide to you whatever you want to see.
does
Okay.
NHTSA do any evaluation?
They do, and also the University of Georgia evaluates every program that the Governor's Office of Highway Safety funds independently.
Okay.
And although you don't do enforcement, you organize enforcement activities throughout the state.
Yes, sir.
And I know you had some questions about travel, and, I think one of the problems some of the committee members had with it was that you had $2,000 in the first 6 months, and then, what was it, 80,000 in the second 6 months?
And yes, sir, I appreciate that question, because the way our calendar operates is more stacked on the back end instead of the front end. When you go into the first part of the fiscal year, you headed into the Christmas and New Year's season. So the most of our travel is stacked on the back end of the calendar.
And in addition, we didn't have any money. They had $8,000 to work with, so they really couldn't go put those programs in place or participate in them until we came back to you and asked you and showed you what we had.
And, we see like the one to New York, how many people go to that?
It's, well, in our world, because it's the 8 people, the majority of them go.
And we, Mr. Chairman, we got 28 employees, so you're talking about 8 people, and they are held to pretty stringent requirements before they travel to different conferences.
And I know a lot of agencies go to conferences, and we're not trying to pick on you. We were just trying to, it seemed almost irrational to us that 2,000 to 88,000 in 6 months, and I'm sure
Well,
we.
that was my fault. I'll take the blame for that, because I enlisted in that first document the first document that I gave to Courtney, I actually put 2 different conferences on it. It was the Savannah one and the New York one, and they were actually in FY24. So when I took them off, it was the 39,000, which is what I believe was added, 36,000.
And I know a lot of them are in-state, and they're apparently very much less expensive than going to New York or Seattle, or, I've gone on some of those myself, and I know how expensive it can be.
Yes, sir.
Any more questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Turner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here on the Driver's Education Commission.
I think I know a little about that.
Yes, sir, you do. Thank you. This is on page 24 of your track sheet, section 39.12.2. You'll see that's a negative $2.913 million. Let me give you a little background on how we arrived here at that number. So, as you well know, sir, in 2021-2022 legislative session, HB 202 was a bill to increase the surcharge on traffic citations for driver training in the state from 1.5% to 3%. It also eliminated the sunset provision. That bill passed the House and made it through Senate committee on sine die. It was the second bill to come up on the list before adjournment that night, so it did not make it to the floor for a vote. Because of that, the sunset, the 1.5% surcharge that was in the statute at that time sunset on June 30th of 2022, and that's how we arrived with no budget right now. The Office of Planning and Budget informed us that because it was sunset that we couldn't have a budget. However, since July 1, 2022 of this year, the state has collected $1.1 million of those traffic citation surcharges on tickets that were issued prior to June 30th. So the state's collected that money, and since July 1 on cases that have been adjudicated since then. So OCGA 15-21-181 states, in relation to the Joshua's Law, states that it's the intent of the General Assembly that, subject to appropriation, an amount equal to such proceeds received from fines in any fiscal year shall be made available the following fiscal year to the Commission for the purposes set forth in code. So logic would tell you that the funds collected by the state in this current fiscal year in 23 should be appropriated in FY 24. That's $1.1 million to date from July 1 through last week. OPB projects that would be somewhere around $1.5 million. So our request to this committee is that you would appropriate at a minimum the $1.1 million that was collected for the purpose of driver training in the FY 2024 budget. If not, we will not have any funds to operate. That includes all of our operating budget, our staff, and our scholarship program, which will cease to exist for the entire fiscal year until funding is restored. There is a bill, Mr. Chairman, that you're carrying for us, HB 242, in this current session. It would reestablish that surcharge at 3%, and it did receive a due pass this morning in the House Motor Vehicle Committee. And we feel like that it will pass this session, but if we don't have funding in FY 24, we'll cease to operate until those funds catch back up.
And we thought it was gonna pass last year, and the Lieutenant Governor decided to give his going away speech as our bill came up, and he spent 15 to 20 minutes talking about that, and we didn't get a vote. So it's a program that's in demand throughout the state. All the statistical information shows that we have reduction in fatalities, injuries, accidents for beyond those who don't take it. There are greater reductions, and you know, I deal with it all the time, even though I'm no longer involved in it. But you know, we're fourth in the nation now in traffic fatalities, and the only states that are ahead of us are California, Texas, and Florida, which all double our population. So you know, there's inequities there, and I don't know what it is, but I think driver education, there's a reason that young men under the age of 25 pay a lot more for insurance than those of us in the older bracket. So
I can share more about our scholarship program if you feel it's appropriate, but
I think most everyone here knows, and you know, I think I do need to get the director to sign the rule statement, though. I have to turn in when it's something that you carry for a state organization department. It requires the signature of the director. So.
Sure.
And I need to get that done so we can get it in the rules.
We'll take care of it today.
Any questions from anybody about anything? I see we don't have any audience left, so I don't guess we have any from the audience. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you all so much. We appreciate the opportunity.